Imagine growing up where chaos is your normal, where addiction defines your childhood, and home never truly feels safe. Today's guest, Max Stevens, not only survived, but transformed his trauma into powerful wisdom. Now a renowned personal strategist coaching Hollywood elites, tech giants, and top CEOs, Max is living proof that your past doesn't have to dictate your future. So join me, Jason Rigby, on the Recovered Addict podcast as Max shares his raw, unfiltered journey from childhood darkness to personal mastery. This episode isn't just a story, it's a lifeline for anyone who's ever struggled silently in the shadows of addiction. Max, welcome to the episode.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
I know you faced addiction with your parents and you lived in a home with addiction. So I want to kind of start off. What's the first memory you have as a child realizing something was deeply wrong at home?
My dad always did a really good job at trying to hide it from me. So I wasn't one of those kids who grew up in a house with, domestic violence. And my dad was very, very clear that he wanted to try and keep me separate from his challenges as best as he possibly could. My parents separated when I was really young, so I have no memory of them being together. My mum has always been healthy and happy and those things. And my dad has been the one who's had his challenges. And the first time I've really sort of caught on that something may have been going wrong was when my dad wouldn't show up for things. And, like I would call him yesterday or the day before, I should say. I would call him the day before and say, hey, like, I'm really looking forward to seeing you. And he goes, yep, I'll pick you up at, whatever. And then nothing would happen. And then I would call days later, or, we would get back in touch and he would have no memory of like making the arrangement. And so I started to go like, okay, something is going on here. So it was probably like my first clue, definitely.
Can you share like a specific moment or maybe even an event from your childhood that you feel can still profoundly and maybe it still even impacts you today?
It was a series of events that really, really impacted me. But the cycle that I went through was that I would motivate my dad and say, I believe in you. You can do this. We would look into getting him help, and then we would find it, and he would go away for 60 or 90 days and get straight, and then come back, and then anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months later, he would relapse again, and so the cycle would sort of repeat like through that, and I was his rock, like trying to pull him through that. But I think by way of the things that still impact me today, like I've said this to certain clients, that like my first heartbreak wasn't with a woman. My first heartbreak was through my dad, because every time I went through that cycle, I had just a little bit less faith, So like the first time I was like super motivated, like we got him through, we'd celebrate together. I would feel like I'd done my job to help him get through that. And then he would relapse and I'd be heartbroken and disappointed and sad and all those things. And then I'd say, all right, Max, come on, let's try this again. And so I sort of played the role of the parent and trying to sort of help him get well. And, I can remember it started probably when I was in my sort of early teenage years, like 13, 14. And I used to say to myself, that's okay. You still have, 5 years left of childhood. So you can catch up this time. And then it was 4 years. And then it was 3. And then it was 2. And then it was 1. And then it was over. And so that definitely still stays with me because it was like a series of what I, at the time, and probably on some level still do, like internalize as failures on my part.
Do you feel like whenever you look at yourself, do you feel like you could have done something better or if this would have been different? Did you ever have that? I mean, I'm probably not so much now because I know you've done a ton of self-awareness work. But, like then was it kind of like, oh, he relapsed. Did you ever blame yourself?
Oh, I'm sure I did, I'm sure I did. But the thing is, I think that because they are formative experiences, they're not, well, certainly for me, they weren't rationalized to myself in that way. You know, I didn't realize that that's what was happening, that every time he would relapse, I would see it as a personal failure of mine. And so, like, his journey and mine started to get like entangled together, where like if he was good, I was good. If he was bad, I was bad, like we had a pretty codependent relationship. Yeah, certainly. Like, certainly. The tough belief that got like wired in there was like if I was better, or rather more close to home, if my dad had loved me more, he would have been able to get healthy. So was a pretty entangled, like emotionally entangled situation.
So you were feeling like he's not only just letting you down, but he must not love you enough because you're not good enough,
Yeah.
or else he wouldn't have this addiction.
Yeah, yeah, and there's probably stuff in there around, like, it wasn't just something he was doing to himself, he was doing it to us, like, so I'd like I said, this is the danger in addiction with codependent relationships is that the boundaries get, like, really messy and muddled, so, like, his journey became mine, and my life's mission became, like, to fix him, to have him get healthy.
Did it, because I mean, when you're in an addicted household like this, it creates this survival mentality for a lot of people. How did you navigate like fear or uncertainty or, especially, daily? Like, what was that like? Was it kind of like, oh, I hope dad's okay today? Or, you know, was there fear
Of course, and navigate fear and uncertainty.
in a survival mentality?
Yeah. So, like, my dad and I pulled a lot of our resources together, like, to try and survive. So, like, I was like, at the time when I was 15, I was coaching, like, some young athletes in tennis. And so, like, it was just like a part-time job I had after school. And, like, I would call my dad and I'd be like, "Hey, we should hang out." And he would say, "Well, I've got enough money to get to you, but not enough to get home." And I would say, "That's okay. Like, I've got some to get us back. I've got some to get us back." And he would say, "Yeah, and I'm just letting you know I don't have any food." And I'd be like, "That's okay. I have a little bit left over. So we can, you know, buy some spaghetti or something." So we were always trying to, like, pull our resources together and living very scarcely. So by way of survival, that, like, certainly, like, the financial aspect of living like that was really hard. So, like, I've done a lot of work around, like, my relationship with money. Certainly I'm feeling worthy of being able to earn it.
Do you still have a fear of losing money?
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, definitely. Like, I think, like, that experience, if you like, because, it goes into a deeper point around whether ultimately the pathway through it is actually to accept the shadow side of what I sort of went through. But I would argue that that feeling is never very far away. It's often available. It's taken a tremendous amount of personal development for me to get to where I'm at where I'm at. But I wonder, it's probably one of our later talking points around how one can get through something like that. It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. Like, I've been very fortunate to do what I do, and that would never have happened if I didn't have the pain that I do.
Do you think it affects or has it affected your other relationships? Like the survival mentality or the
Yeah,
fear?
yes. So definitely. So, like, only child growing up in that environment, like, I learned to regulate myself really well. So keeping relevant sort of emotional distance so I can maintain what I would call, like, independence, but is really just a way of sort of navigating emotional safety is, like, that has been a challenge, definitely. So, like, I have a, sort of avoidant attachment style, like, but not avoidant in that I won't get back to people or things like that. It's more that, like, me and my fiance, if we're in conflicts, like, my first instinct is to pull away, like, because I can regulate myself. It's been an interesting dynamic for us to work through because she has more of, like, an anxious attachment style, so she comes towards me, and the more she comes towards me, the more I sort of want to withdraw. So
Mhm.
I've done a lot of work by way of attempting to choose a different response in those scenarios.
Is hers fear too?
Beg your pardon?
Is the anxiety fear too? Like, are both
Yeah,
of you
yeah, so,
experiencing
like,
fear in
yeah,
that moment?
absolutely. So depending on our, like, attachment wounds that we have in relationships, we learn to deal with that in a particular way. She's an only child like me, right? And she learned to deal with that in a particular way by way of moving towards the person and saying, like, "It's okay, come." And I learned to deal with it by pulling away. So hers is, like, about trying to reach somebody, and mine is about trying to regulate myself. So that dynamic plays out, yeah.
What do you feel like whenever here you are, you did great at tennis because I remember you telling me at our last podcast, and we went into your coaching and your new book that's out. So I encourage people to listen to that part because this could be kind of part one for you, and then you guys can listen to part two, which is the other one, and kind of see the other side of all this. But do you feel like, your dad's calling you or you're calling him and then he's turning around and being, basically using creative ways to get money from you, and then you're codependent with him. Was there a time where you were like, "Screw him. F off, was there frustration? Was there a lot of frustration? Or were you buying into what he was saying to you as like a truth?
No, I was very bought in. Like, I was very bought in. I felt that I was his support system. Like, I was his rock, and people around me would certainly say, like, "I think you should pull away." And I would say, "No, no, no, I can't. Like, I can't. Like, if I do, he'll die, or I'm the only person he's got, or, things of that nature." Yeah, there was certainly moments of frustration and moments of anger, like, particularly by way of, um, him relapsing and stuff like that. Because I was like, "No, we have to go through this again." And probably the biggest moment of frustration, it came when I was 21 or 22, and I said to him, like, "I've been holding out on us being able to make up lost time from my childhood, but now I I look at myself in the mirror and I can't find that child, like, that time is over." And so I just said, "You're on your own now."
At 21, you said that.
Yeah, yeah, 21, 22, yeah, around that time.
Before that, what age did you become aware that, we'll go after 21 because I think that'll help a lot of people, but I want to kind of stay,
Yeah, sure.
with this false childhood you basically had. But what was the youngest age did you become aware that your family situation wasn't normal?
13.
13 is when it
Yep,
really popped out?
yep.
And then is that when your mom left?
No, my mum separated from my dad when I was 3. So
Oh, okay.
I lived in 2 separate houses, like, for much of my childhood. But my dad it really went downhill for my dad after his 2nd divorce.
Mm.
So my dad remarried, and yeah, my dad remarried, and that was not a good relationship.
Did your mom know of his addiction and didn't tell you?
Yep, of
Is that
course.
why she broke up with him?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so when my mom got pregnant with me, she said to my dad, like, "You've really gotta get your act together here." Like, and he didn't. And so she said, like, once my mom knew that she was gonna have me and he wasn't, she pulled away from me.
That was smart on her end.
Yeah.
I mean, saved you a lot of damage from 3 to 13.
Yeah, that's right. So I didn't really know. I didn't really know.
So that was hidden from 3 to 13. You just thought your dad was kind of like single dad doing his thing, or like you said, he was married again. Did you see that they were having problems when you were younger?
Yeah, 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 I did. But again, like, it was nothing major. Like, it was nothing major or dramatic, but I could definitely tell that the dynamic was off and things like that. And I never got on well with her very well, but I think that's sort of I don't think that's particularly uncommon. And it was largely at 13 where I started to question how come my parents aren't together. And so I would say so after my dad got divorced the 2nd time, I would say to my mum, "Why don't you guys get back together?" And that then opened up a whole slew of conversations around my mum trying to share but not share, as to what happened. I was way too young to be able to be well equipped enough to deal with something like that by way of a conversation. And so I turned on my mum pretty hard because I said, like, "Well, you're not telling me. Like, why aren't you telling me?"
Mm. So you felt like it was a betrayal.
I felt like there was a betrayal. I felt like I was being excluded. I felt like I'm like, "Just tell me." And I said, "Did he cheat on you? Did he this? Did he that?" And she was like, "No, no, no." And I said, "Then what the fuck?" I said, like, why aren't you?" Yeah, I said, like, "We could be a family together again," and all this sort of stuff. And my mum obviously wasn't having it. So but the thing is, like, the giveaway was, like, after my dad's 2nd divorce when I was about 13 or 14, like, he relapsed. So that was normally like age 13 and 14 was when I started to notice he wasn't showing up for things, or like his memory was off, and things like that. And he was tired all the time. And so I had no idea. Like, I didn't know what was happening. So my dad got on like methadone and endone and all sorts of stuff when he was coming out of rehabs. And just for your listeners, as I'm sure they'll be aware, like, methadone is like, even more addictive than heroin and opioids. So yeah, like, I just didn't understand. I couldn't make sense of, like, what the drug was really doing to him at the time. Like, I just thought he was tired all the time and wasn't showing up for things, but I never really grasped the gravitas of my situation and his.
That yeah, that's 13 to 18, here you are a teenager. Which way did you go? Did you mirror addictive behaviors, or were you just constantly, once you became aware, distancing yourself from that
Yeah.
pattern? Which
Yeah.
way did you go?
I was lucky, like, I was lucky with my dad because he always said, um, "As long as you don't do drugs, like, you're gonna be fine." So that is the only thing that could mess you up. So it was like this huge, like, red flag in my experience. So, like, I never drank, never smoked, never did nothing, like, until, like, I experimented a little bit in college, like, in university, but, like, all through those formative years, like, I was miles away from any of that. Like, I remember, like, being 13 or 14, and I was walking home with a group of kids from school, and one of them pulled out a cigarette and started smoking, and I ran into my house. Like, when we passed my house, I ran into my house and broke down crying. I was just, like, trying to create as much distance as I possibly could.
Do you have a fear that you have addictive personality like your
Oh,
dad?
yeah, oh, yeah, of course. Of course I do. Like, of course I do. Like, I think it's how much of it is genetic, how much of it is genetic and environment and conditioning, etcetera. But I think, like, I've been lucky in some ways that, like, just take alcohol, for example, like, it doesn't really agree with me. Like, don't like the taste. I would argue that no one does, but, like, don't really like the taste, and it doesn't have, like, a cleansing, alleviating effect. It has a shitty effect. So same with smoking. Like, I've never and it's been a good thing, but, like, I've never really found anything where I'm like, "Oh, wow, that was just," like, I sort of
Right.
even like with alcohol, I think about, like, how one feels the next day. I'm just like, "That is not worth it," like, I just
Yeah, no.
it's so not worth it.
I have the same exact thing. Alcohol makes me feel kinda depressed or depressant. It, like, knocks me down. It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
build me up. Even in the moment, I don't feel very good, and then I just get a headache. So it's kinda, and then
Yes.
weed makes me paranoid, so I don't like any of that stuff. So I've never done any other drugs or nothing because I don't want to, I'm fearful. The
Yeah.
only thing I'm addicted to is food.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ah, yes, that's a good example. Yeah, so, like, food's been a thorny relationship for me too. Um I think in a lot of ways, like, I have an emotional attachment to fast food in that way because when my dad and I had a little bit more money, that was like the first thing we would go and have
Mhm.
together. Sad as that may be, but that's the truth. And
Do you have addictions in your relationships, did you think? Like, where you were always searching for love or you would find someone.
I think in my adult life, I got obsessed with personal development, like from 20 years old. And because I got obsessed, I would often meet people, be with them for a while, but because I was growing, and changing. Like, we would meet, be a fit, and then wouldn't be a fit after a while. And then the next person would come along, and I would meet them where I was at the new level, if you like, and then would be a fit, and I'd keep growing, and so on. And I've been lucky with my fiance because she's very, very interested in growing too. And so now we are growing together, which is just great.
Yeah, that's so interesting because a lot of people don't realize that aspect. I mean, like you said, you've done a lot of work. There are a lot of people that listen to this episode and they wonder why, the person that they were in a relationship 2 years ago, isn't a fit now, where they may have, like, especially when it comes to addicts. Addicts will seek addicts. There's nothing more like you go to a meeting, those people in the meeting, the addiction meeting, will find each other, and then they'll trauma bond. Did you ever have any experiences with that? Did it affect you enough to where did you have any trauma bonding or anything like that?
Well, certainly with him, I did. Certainly with him, I did. But I was always on like a mission in my life. And so I probably wasn't the easiest person to be in a relationship with because I was always looking at what's next because I thought if I become successful enough, I could save my dad. And so,
Mm.
and so like, I don't know, if I was with a girlfriend and we were watching a movie or something like that, I'd feel very super anxious, because I wasn't working or striving for anything. And so that became a challenge because I was sort of looking for somebody who would help me sort of on that mission, rather than in my mind take away from it. But in retrospect, they were healthy and I wasn't.
Were you always looking for, I mean, your mom was loving and kind to you always? Just typical mom, like, great
Yep,
mom, everything
very
good.
much.
So you didn't have issues with that. How do you think your dad affected you? Obviously, you said that there was this distrust, like, and then things would be like, did you have issues with trust and believing people's promises?
Certainly his, yes. I've had a lot of challenges with trust by way of like trusting life that things are going to work out. So that's definitely been a challenge. Like I was hypersensitive to what people thought of me, and hypersensitive to anything that might have gone wrong. And if something did go wrong, it was my fault.
So that was the same pattern with your dad, like, if he would have been well if it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I mean, if I
Yeah.
was a good
Yeah, like
son.
that's the yeah, that's right. So like that was the pattern that played out in my life, was like taking responsibility for things that are not my responsibility, you know? And that
Would it give you to the point to where it gave you guilt? Even though it wasn't your responsibility, would you feel guilt?
I'd feel anxious is probably a better word.
Anxious?
Like
Right.
I'd feel anxious because I don't know, what's an example? Like if like in college, for example, in university, like I used to go up to people at parties that I like barely knew and I'd say, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the conversation. I just wanted to ask you something. Like, are you and I okay? Like, are we okay? And they'd sort of be going, yeah, 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 I think so. Or are we okay? I said, no, no, I'm asking you, like, are we okay? And they go, yeah, yeah, yeah. I go, okay, cool. And then I go and ask the next person. So like it was like this, like I was just hypersensitive that if anything around me like wasn't going well, like it was my fault. And so here I was like running around university parties asking people if we were okay. It was very strange behavior.
Well, I think it's also, like, not only being the only child and then having, this survival mentality that you had to develop, and then worried about any moment something bad could happen, the hammer could drop. So I get that. It also creates, and I want people to understand this, and maybe you could put your coaching hat just on real fast. We'll take it back off. But it also creates a weird form of narcissism.
But yeah, yeah, people pleasing is highly manipulative, like highly manipulative under the guise of being nice.
Yeah, because that's what you were doing. They're talking to somebody else, living their life, having probably totally fine with you, but then you had to interrupt that just to make sure,
Correct.
because I think a lot of people, especially if they've been in an addictive family, because I'll get questions like this, and the questions are always me, I. Because it's a survival thing. You're running around wanting to make sure. And then when I do talk to them, if I talk to someone, they're always worst case scenario, worrying all the time. It's just this repetitive little hamster wheel going on in their head about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, absolutely. No, it's one of the things that I was working with somebody on this many, many years ago, and they said, "What do you want to work on?" And I said, "I'd really love to be free of the judgment, like of the opinions of others, like not." And basically, like the core insight of the session was, you feel that way because you judge people.
Mm,
And I thought,
that's true. Yeah.
right. It's like that quote, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And, so that got me curious, certainly.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know, and it's funny when we're going to get into this, how your work is offsetting from all of this.
Mhm.
Because as a child in an addicted home, you talked about parenting the parent. Now you're parenting CEOs, so I think that's funny. But you're parenting people a lot older than you. That's like a dad figure. But parent their parents. Did you, in experiencing this role reversal, how do you think it shaped your emotional growth?
Well,
Parenting the parent.
yeah, like, I obviously grew up really fast. And, like, I would have conversations with my dad, and he'd be like, "Maybe you should just stay at home from school tomorrow." And I'm like, "No, I'm pretty sure I should go," like, whereas, like, normally that conversation goes the other way. But, yeah, like, of course, there's the sorry, I'm putting my coaching hat on a little bit here, but like the human psyche like is not like one person. It's like a community of people. And when the psyche is functioning well, like all of these pieces like are integrated and work together. And what happens for us is when we have traumatic experiences, there's this like part that becomes disintegrated, that is stuck in a particular point in time because we haven't gone back and actually reintegrated those experiences. And that can take time, like can take many attempts to do that. So yeah, like I grew up really fast and that was really good. That was actually a blessing because uh well, I mean I'm 29 now and very, very blessed to work with the people that I do. And that's often a question I get asked is how is it that you can do that when you're very young? And I think a large part of that, but still, like there is the 13-year-old that wants to just be able to be 13 that I sort of missed out on in some way.
Yeah, that's always the hard part, and it's the whole idea of, and I've seen this practice happen a lot, and it really heals and helps people, is to go back and you've probably done this, but go back and talk to your 13-year-old self,
Right.
and then recognize at 13, you're just a kid. There's no, and then having that conversation now, the future self talking to the 13-year-old, it's so powerful. And I encourage people to do that,
Yes.
and I know this. I want to keep your coaching hat on and answer this question through that. Are there strengths or gifts you developed specifically because of the adversity in your home? Because there are people out there and they're like, here I am, 21 years old. My parents were fighting addiction. I've had a shit life my whole life. How can they alchemize that? What's the superpowers that comes out of this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like the thing to understand, right, about like the superhero archetype is that the hero and the villain, they have like the same backstory. So like they both experience trauma, they both experience pain, they both experience disappointment, fear, anger, whatever. And like the saying goes, the villain says, the world hurt me, so I will hurt it back. Whereas the hero says, the world's hurt me, I'll make sure it doesn't hurt anybody else. And and like by way of your listeners, if they're in that spot, that actually can become your biggest gift in the end. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so good. Like, specifically, I know you're really good at coaching people. You're really good at listening and understanding, and then you're good at finding, is it because you always had to find a solution because you've grown up so quickly?
Well, my dad in some ways was sort of like my first and only failed client, like if I think about it like that, you know. So patterns of human behavior became very obvious, and so being able to track my dad's behavior from like a meta perspective by way of patterns, it got me very interested in human behavior. But certainly in terms of strengths that came out of it, it's sort of like this thing like Spider-Man gets bitten, but he also gets these superpowers. And so, superpowers are born from traumatic experiences. Like I haven't met any hyper successful, world changing human being who hasn't gone through significant pain. Like I think they're rare. I think they're rare. And I think that if you see it as if you're able to see it as part of your story and that it's a necessary chapter in one story, then I think that is incredibly useful.
Yeah, and I wanna get into that more, how we can help, people that are listening, and we'll do that towards the end. But getting back to, here you are, you're 20 years old, you're like, I'm gonna study as much as I can, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna go in this direction. So you're learning, reading books, probably kind of being obsessed with it all, right?
Right.
And then you're 23, 24, 25. You've got some years underneath you with this. Was there emotional baggage at 25, 24 still affecting you?
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, definitely. So the thing I shared that story in our other conversation together around when I went to India. And just the short version of it is that I met someone on the side of the road who was meditating and they were crying. And I asked them what was wrong. And they turned to me and said, no, 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 these are happy tears. And this person was clearly homeless. And I said, oh, what makes you so happy? And he said, oh, nothing really. I'm just happy. And that always stayed with me because I thought to myself that it became a clue that what would you say? That my whole modus operandi for what a good life looked like I saw through it for a second. So the thing for me was the practice that I got into was meditation, and meditation saved my life. Like I've now done somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,500 hours of like formal practice. And yeah, without that, I'd be really fucked, like really fucked. So yeah, I think that the big moment for me is that I became less and less interested in life on the outside, and I became more and more interested on life on the inside. Because if our internal reality is able to be re-engineered in some way, then things on the outside can't hurt us.
So the victim mentality.
No, so well, I mean, yeah, sure, but it's more like it's more like if you put someone with a lot of trauma and a monk, in an empty room by themselves, they're gonna have vastly different experiences. But those vastly different experiences by way of their own internal architecture, and I've found certainly the pattern in my life has been that as I have spent more and more time on life on the inside, life on the outside matters a lot less. And that became the big shift for me because I believed, and this is sort of what got me into coaching, I believed that an external result could cure this internal pain. Like if I achieved something, or I earned
Mhm.
something or whatever. I was chasing, I was like Pavlov's dog who salivates on the wrong bell. I was chasing something external to fix something internal. And that was what got me interested in coaching because on the other side of restructuring that psychological architecture, I was then able to look out at the world and say, this is what everybody does. It's not just like, I mean, sure, people with trauma can do it like me, but we're all doing that to some degree. And so that got me very interested. That got me even more interested in the human condition.
Was there like I know with the thousands of hours of meditation, what was the hardest belief about yourself or your worth that you had to unlearn because of what you experienced
Yeah,
in your
yeah, good question. So might have shared this on our last chat, but the thing for me was because I had internalized this belief that if my dad had really loved me more, he would have been able to get healthy. Right? It took me years of meditating, even just to be able to articulate it like that. I just felt it as a pain. I felt it as like a twist in my stomach. I felt it as, whatever. But as I started to work on myself more and more and being able to articulate what was going on for me, that was what I landed on. But the thing that I never saw, right, up until this particular moment, which I'll share with you, is actually investigating whether the actual belief in the first place was true.
Mm.
So, like,
Go more into that, like the investigation
so
process.
right, so the thing about human epistemology, right, is our biggest problem in life, by way of the human condition, is self deception, which means that like the world is not like the biggest fear or the biggest doubt or the biggest problem that we encounter in our lives is not that the world out there is fucked up. It's that I am going to and is out to deceive me. It's that I am going to deceive myself. And so what's an example? Working with a guy at the moment, he's a CEO. He's got a lot of trust issues in people, right? The biggest problem for him is not that he's going to let in the wrong person and get fucked over. The biggest problem for him is going to be that he never lets in the right person, you
Mhm,
know?
mhm,
So
mhm.
it goes by way of that. Like people who what's another example? Like a woman has had a series of bad relationships and has sworn off, men and thinks that men are XYZ. The biggest problem for her is not that she's gonna date the next guy who's gonna be the same. The biggest problem is that she's gonna give up and never find someone good.
Right,
Like,
right,
so
exactly.
so we're always in this game, like
Or build a defense mechanism to support that and then be lonely, but
correct.
be successful in other areas and then downplay that, the
Correct.
deception part.
Correct. And even by way of like as an example, like even by I work with clients and like one of the things I have them do is put together their ideal week. So like one of the things I've always detested a little bit within personal development is the idea of a vision, because a vision is something that is like ever receding and sort of out of touch with our real world experience. So like so anyway, so I was talking with a client of mine. I said, go put together your ideal week and let's take a look at what that would look like. Right. And he sort of came back to me the following week. I said, "Oh, how'd you go?" And he said, I didn't do it." And I said, tell me what happened." And he said, "Well, Max, I'm just not like that. Like, it's not how I do things. I don't, I'm not a big planner and, stuff like that." And I said, "Mate, like the biggest problem for you is not that you're going to do this schedule and become some hyper anal, person who structures or that the biggest problem for you is that you're not going to do anything, right? Under the guise of, well, quote unquote, I'm just not like that." So you see, like how we deceive ourselves, like
Mhm,
that.
mhm.
This is the thing, right? So we have these axiomatic. Axiomatic just means like fundamental. Like we have these fundamental beliefs or suppositions. And what's that quote? It's like we question all of our beliefs except for those that we truly believe, and those we never question. And right, and the I think it's awesome. So I can't remember who said that, but anyway, but right. So with this belief with me is if my dad had really loved me, he would have been able to get healthy. And I finally was able to articulate that and actually look at that statement like in front of me. And I said, like, that statement right there is responsible for all of my pain because that's like it's from that axiomatic claim that everything else shoots off. My pursuit of
Mhm.
success, my pursuit of what I think is important, my relationships, my this, my that. Like this is the axiomatic belief that sits at the heart of everything. And I stopped for a minute and I said, "Well, where did you get that idea?" And I said, "Okay, let's just look at this, right? So let's just really look at this." I said, like, your dad has had challenges with addiction since long before you were born. So, okay, so if he's had these challenges since long before you were born, then why does he have these challenges? Well, he has these challenges because of challenges that he's had in his own life, trauma that he's inherited, right? And so now you, as in you, Max, coming on the scene to say that if he'd really loved you then he would have been able to get healthy. Like, it's quite a selfish position
Mhm.
to hold, like as though the love that he would have for me should be enough to clear out, you know, 40 years of neural pathways and psychological habits and behavioral patterns and
Especially when you went through 2 bad divorces.
and the rest. Like, you know, like
Yeah.
if you heard my dad's story, like you know, you'd go, fucking hell, like I can see why he's an addict, you know? Like I arrived back at that statement and I said, okay, like, is this a fact? Like, is this a fact that is baked into the universe? And I said, no, no, it's not. Okay, so let's just start there. So it's not a fact, it's a belief. Okay. So why do you believe this then? And I started to say, well, I believe this because if this is true, then it gives me a pathway to be better. Because if I'm better, then there's a possibility that he'll get healthy. And I said, well, how do you know that that's true? And so the whole thing started to, like, I started to sort of see through the illusion a little bit. And I said, okay, what would the implications be if this wasn't true? And I said that the reason why my dad has the challenges that he does is because of challenges within himself. What would the implications of that be? Well, one of them would be that this actually doesn't have nearly as much to do with me as what I think. And what would the implication of that be? Well, it's if it can't be true then that I'm not lovable. And then I just walked through that and I said, okay, and what would the implication of that be? That you are lovable. That you are lovable. And in that moment, like, it left me.
Mm.
And I went like, and it was like the the fog had lifted, you know?
Yeah, it's almost like and this is a gruesome but it's almost like when they've interviewed serial killers, and they're really trying to they thought that was more in depth with them in picking their victims, but it was more of just like an opportune thing.
Yeah.
It could have been me or you or Susan or, whoever. It wasn't but we were wanting to put some type of significance in it, and the investigators were wanting to put these patterns together that weren't even there. It was just, "Oh, this person, I saw them. I happened to be driving by, and I saw them walk in the door, and something hit me, and then I came back later in the evening and broke into their house and killed them." It's dumb. It was like just randomness. And I think a lot of this has to do with, that survival mechanism that we have inside of ourselves, and when survival hits, ego hits. Of course, and ego is going to play lots of different roles, whether it plays the perpetrator or the victim. But I want to get into, do you think forgiveness is even necessary for healing? Did you forgive? Is there a process for forgiveness towards your dad? Are you still trying to figure out forgiveness? What's your experience with forgiveness?
So in my view, forgiveness is one of the most important things by way of the human condition. I don't know how many times I'm not religious by nature, but I don't know how many times it's listed in the Bible, but it's over like 100 times, and I think there's a
Mhm.
reason for that. Yes, absolutely. Like, I think the thing is forgiveness is a very, very deep topic. It's almost like a metaphysical, like, topic. My experience was, man, there's so much to unpack in that. But my
When
experience
did it start? When did you start kind of getting a grasp for forgiveness towards your dad?
well well, see, a again, this is where it comes back to this conversation about the psyche, because the adult in me has, like, and did a long time ago. Because I can see rationally speaking that, everything I just said, right? The
Mhm.
13-year-old, right? The 13-year-old in me needed to be able to speak. So, like, for example, if you go to, like, a really good therapist, right? Just by way of example, like, the therapist is not interested in what the adult in you says. So, if they say, "Tell us about your childhood," and you're like, "Yeah, it was fine," and, I had some tough experiences with some bullies, and they'll stop you and they go, "Tell us what that was like." And you go, "Oh, it's all right. It's just kids being kids." But it's like, it's the adult in you talking. So, and they're not
Mhm.
interested in that. They go like, "Yeah, but how did it make you feel?" Or whatever. And they're trying to get the wounded part of you to speak. And so one of the challenges that I have with my dad is that he doesn't remember a lot of what happened.
Of course. Right, right.
And so it's sort of like I'm getting mad at someone for cheating on me in my dream, because like whenever I was trying to engage with him about it, he would sort of go, I don't, like, what did I do? Like, so, and he'd go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But there's not like a shared context there, right?
Mhm.
Now, I was lucky in some way that my dad was willing to engage with me about these kind of conversations and was willing to be there for me and was sorry. But the first thing that I did, and I also have clients do, is I say, like, write out exactly what you're hanging on to. So actually go back and what still brings forward these feelings? Because a lot of times we sort of generalize them and we say, oh, he wasn't there for me. But it's like, when was he not there for you? Like, actually let's get our hands around this, right? Because I think fear and pain is what is it? It's like 1,000 miles wide and 1 inch deep. It's like,
Yeah, likes ambiguity.
yeah, that's right. When we actually sort of look at it and we really bring it into the light, you know, it often appears very different than when it hides in the shadows. And so I went through and I wrote down every single, what I called at the time, transgressions that I was hanging on to. And there was 27. There's 27 different things that I was hanging on to. And I got my dad in front of me and I went through them one by one until he remembered. And I remember the moment where we were at 27 and the look on his face, like, I said, right now we have shared context. And he looked at me and he said, I'm so sorry. And he said, what can I do? Like, as in, like, how can I even begin to make amends? And I said, nothing. I forgive you. And I watched him sort of crumble in on himself and he said, oh, you shouldn't. And I said, I do. And I untie you and I untie myself from this now as well. So that was like one part. But I would argue there's a deeper part there. There's a deeper part there, which doesn't get talked a lot about in like this addiction conversation, or addiction discourse, which is this. And this is really, really foundational. So there's three thought leaders within Western psychotherapy. So you have Carl Jung, you have Freud, and you have another guy named Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler has come into public discourse largely because there's this new book called The Courage to be Disliked. Like, a lot of people are reading that at the moment.
Right, right.
And Jung and Freud both had what could be described as a causal explanation of the human condition. So as in they'll say, Max, the reason why you're like this is because of these experiences that happened to you, right? And this is why you are the way that you are, right? And we can unpack those and understand them at a deeper levels and all that sort of stuff. Alfred Adler fundamentally disagreed with those two. And he said, no. Like, the reason why Max is hanging on to what he's hanging on to is because it serves a need for him in the present.
Mm-hmm.
So his claim is that if you take a causal approach to the human condition, it speaks to a sort of pseudo-determinism, which is like, I have no choice. I had no choice. I had to be this way because of what has happened to me. Whereas Adler looks at, like, there are purposes in your life where hanging on to this is serving. And his view is, if we can understand what those purposes are now, then you can let go of them now. And that's a much more confrontational, but also empowering line of thinking. So, when I sort of discovered this, I was thinking about it and I said, okay, like, so if I'm hanging on to feelings about my dad, by definition, that must mean I'm choosing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm choosing to do that. And I said, okay. So let's just say that was true. Why on earth would I be choosing to hang on to this? And I sat with it and I said, why I'm choosing to hang on to this is because if my life ever went spectacularly wrong, I would have a way of explaining why that happened. Because if I really let this go, like, and this is one thing I'd really encourage you viewers to listen with their hearts, is like, if I really let this go, I'm free, but I'm also now fully responsible. Anything that
Mm-hmm.
happens for me from here on is on me, because I've made the decision to let this go. And it became very clear that the reason why I was struggling to let it go, like, actually didn't have very much to do with my dad. It had more to do with me and my own self-doubt around things that I was going to be able to do and create in the world. And I wanted to have it there just in case things didn't go well, as a way of explaining it. Because if I really,
It's so good, bro.
because if
That's so good. I want to get into that more. I want to stay on forgiveness for just a few more minutes. I always kind of look at it as, I mean, you got a beach right near you, right? And you're in Australia.
yes, that's right.
I experienced this, and you probably have too. Have you been in the water when there's been a shark, even a small one or whatever?
I hope not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we probably pretty much are, but I mean, you're in Australia, that's where they all are at, right? But I've been in Florida, in Florida here, we have a ton and we have a lot of shark attacks and stuff like that, like you guys. I think we have more, but I always have that. If you see a shark and then it disappears, then you're frantically looking around. I don't know where it's at. I don't know where that there's almost like a relief in kind of this fucked up way when you see the shark. And then they tell you the best way to defend off a shark is to swim towards it, which is like the dumbest. You would think that's the dumbest, but they can't handle something that swims towards them. They're just a dumb fish.
Right.
They're used to something taking off and running away. And to me, this is that same emotional baggage of, I don't even wanna get near the shark. I don't wanna see the shark. I'd rather be in fear and have this trauma in my life constantly and kinda, have it looming. I don't know where it's at, but it's looming around, than face it and swim towards it. And I think that for me, that's been the hard part of forgiveness. It's hard. I haven't had it easy in forgiveness. It hasn't been easy for me to truly let something go is really hard and takes a lot of time, I think. Where am I wrong in that?
Yeah, see, there's different ideas around forgiveness. I suppose the way that I make sense of it is that forgiveness is an insight. It's not a process.
Mm,
And
okay, like an emotional insight? What
yeah,
type of insight?
yeah. And the insight, in my view, goes like this, which is that what you are hanging on to that happened to you
Mhm,
has far less to do with you than you are making out. Like that's the thing. For example, like if I'm working with somebody who, I don't know, they got cheated on in a relationship or something like that,
mhm.
right? It's like that guy or girl, right? But let's just by way of example, that guy who cheated on you. Like, do you really think you're the first person he cheated on?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like even also find it with like workplaces and bosses and stuff, and people leave certain careers with PTSD from how their boss treated them, and it's like, yeah, but like your boss treats everybody that way. Like it's not something that he's doing to you. You know, you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, so to speak. Like by way of my dad, I think it's Heidegger who talks about how we are thrown into the world. Like we don't choose our parents, our country, there's so many things that we don't choose. We just sort of get thrown into universe. And so Heidegger's ideas around how we can sort of handle our thrownness, I think he calls it. And like say, like by way of my dad, it's like this has nothing to do with me. Very, very little to do with me. Like if anything, it's my existence has had a positive impact on his challenges because he's now got something to he's got the role of a dad, that he's trying to fulfill. And I would argue that he'd be further down the chain. So the idea that things happen to me is a it's a very thorny assumption that they are doing this to me. Like
Well, it's the
even when we flip it around, right? Sorry, last thing on that.
yeah.
Even if you flip it around, right? It's like, how many times have you been angry in your life on this too? Like, it's like, how many times have I been angry in my life? And how many times has it actually had something to do with the person that I'm speaking with? It's like very, very few,
Really?
like very, very few. And even if it does have something to do with the person, it's more to do with my inability to handle it in a more constructive way
Mhm.
to do with said person. So like the idea that, like even in our lives, like from a first person perspective, we don't really feel that we're doing stuff to people.
Mhm.
We're just caught up in ourselves often when we fall short. And so when we flip it around and other people and we're on the other side of that, we be like, oh, they're doing this to me. But it's a again, like it's an unexamined like
Yeah, and I don't know where your spiritual aspect of things are. For me, it's like really, if I break it down from my spiritual belief on this, if I break it down, there's really no, they're not really doing anything to me. If I truly understand it, they're not doing anything to me. It's like when Jesus was on the cross, and I'm not like Christian or anything like that, but I love this story. When he was on the cross, he in his agony and despair, and you probably have heard this before, but I mean, there he is at his worst, the worst way to die, and they say crucifixion's the worst way, period. The Romans figured out the most torturous way to kill people. But he said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do." And that was his last words, on the cross. And to be that spiritually enlightened where you could look at somebody and be, whether you believe in karma or, reincarnation doesn't matter, but to look at somebody and be like, they don't know what they're doing, they're not self-aware. Like you've seen people that way that they're just, like you said, they're just doing stuff, like just causing chaos everywhere they go, and for me to take that personal, that's on me, and I don't know if that's, I mean, you could be honest with me, Max. We've been honest with, I don't know if that's a fucked up place to be, but it's helped me a lot because it's like, why am I taking this so personal?
no, I agree. Like, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that, I am reminded of, I think it's Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning,
Mhm. Yes, yeah.
like going through what he went through at the concentration camps. So the story goes, they did like psychosomatic tests on the survivors to test for signs of trauma, and they couldn't find any with him. And they asked him why. And he says, they can take everything from me, but the one thing they can never take from me is the meaning that I give things.
Mhm.
And I think about like, well, surely if he's able to do that with a situation like that, surely I must be able to do that with a situation like mine.
Yeah, I think that's what real healing is.
Yeah, yeah, like I think that yeah, Yeah, healing, like, they say, like, to forgive is to forgive and forget, and some people say, like, well, I forgave, but I never forget. And I go, then you haven't fucking forgiven. But, like, but I think the real healing is seeing that there is nothing to forgive.
Yes, 100%. That's exactly, and that's like 2.0 deep. That's where I think the process starts, and then the forgiveness happens when you look at it. Yeah, wait.
I just come back to that, right, for your listeners. Like, the easiest way to see it is just see it from the other side. When you have fucked up, when you have treated somebody badly,
Mhm,
how often is it really about them? And if and because fundamentally, this is comes back to our point around self-deception. It's like, if you probe, it's like that quote, if the devil ever realized that he was the devil, he would cease being one. So the thing is, if you probe people, what you find is that they believe that they are good people. Like, it's like, I've got things about me that I might not like. I have things about I've made mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. But underneath all that, I am a good person. And so the question becomes like, okay, well, if everybody in the world fundamentally believes that they are good, how come the world's so fucked up?
mhm.
Like, and the reason again is because we deceive ourselves. We deceive ourselves. Like,
Yeah, Hitler wasn't thinking that he was this mass murderer. He actually thought he was doing good.
correct, correct. Fucked up as that may be, but yeah, that's right. And so the thing is, like, just look at this in your own life, right? In your own life, when you fucked up, when you have made a mistake, when you have treated somebody in a way that is unkind, right? How often is that really about them? Really, like, even if you're angry at your spouse, or whatever, like, how much of that can we contribute to them? And versus how much of that can we contribute to the fact that you were tired, the fact that you're burnt out, the fact that, you've had this problem before, like, if we factor in everything, like, how much is really left over for them, you know? And most people will go, yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough. Most of the time it's about me, you know? And then we go, okay, then just flip it around. Like, so when people do quote unquote things to you, like, it's the same phenomenon. It's just from a second person perspective. Like, you're now on the receiving end of someone being incapable of dealing with themselves, just like you at times are incapable of being with yourself. And I think and if you can really see that, then, like, even the idea of, like, well, I need to forgive them, like, it eats itself.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good what you just said, allowing them to deal with themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, or their
Uh,
lack or
uh,
their la
have
or their lack of ability to do that, yeah.
have you ever heard of Wayne Dyer? He's like this old spiritual teacher a long time ago. He told a story that is perfectly with this. I'll make it super short. He had a grandson, they're at a resort. Grandson's out, in the pool with all these little kids. I don't know if you've heard this or not. He's out in the pool with all the little kids, and he's like an 8-year-old grandson. The grandson comes running to him, and he's like, Granddad, I'm, these kids are bullying me. And Wayne Dyer looks at him, he says, I'm a Taoist master. There's nothing I can do to help you. And the kid's just looking at him, 8 years old, like, what? And then, the kid just sits there, cries for a little bit, and then runs back out into the pool, plays around with the kids again, comes back crying even more. And Wayne Dyer looks at him and says, I'm a Taoist master. There's nothing I can do for you. The kid like sits there, cries, and then goes back out into the pool. And then he's like been reading a book or whatever, and Wayne Dyer looks up and he's like, "Where's the kid? I want to make sure everything's kind of okay." And he looks, and those kids are playing with each other that were fighting. It's kind of like, who do we think that we are that we need to feel like we need to get involved? It's that process, and I think it's helpful because I want people to understand this is with forgiveness comes this ability to. I don't know if you call it a boundary or whatever, but how have you done that with your dad, and how can others set that? I mean, your dad doesn't seem to be as toxic now, but what if somebody was toxic? They have a toxic family member. How can they work for that with the boundaries aspect?
Okay, so in order for us to answer this question, let's just do a little bit of groundwork here. Like, is that the reason why, like, so memories that appear to us that are older than, like, 12 to 18 months old, right? That appear to us, they're not random. So what they are, particularly negative memories, right? So what they are is your a part of your brain is, like, signaling to you, saying that, hey, like, you fell in a pit, and that could happen again, right? So, like, that could happen again. And so your brain is constantly bringing it forward, right, to make sure that you don't fall into it again. And the reason why it does that is because you haven't gone back and actually mapped out what you should have done. So, I went left, but I should have gone right. I stayed with that person too long, and I should have left earlier, or whatever. And if you go back and you correct for the error that you made, that part of your psyche reintegrates back in, because it goes like, okay, cool, you've got it, right? Now, why does that matter by way of boundaries? Because often when we are brought up in drug addicted households, there are no boundaries, or like boundaries are all over the place. And so when we move out of that environment into new environments, we either subconsciously seek the same boundaries, or more to the point, we don't know how to enforce our own boundaries because we've never had any practice doing so. Right? Like my fiance is a great example of this. Like she's from Mexico, and in Mexico, like family is everything, and and so it's a very collective culture. Like we stick together, so to speak, by and large, right? Certainly by way of her family. And so one of the things that she's working on at the moment is the ability to say, I didn't ask you to speak into my experience. Like I didn't ask for your advice. I didn't ask for your thoughts. I didn't ask you for any of that. If I ask you, obviously you're welcome to share what you think. But if I don't ask you, then I don't want to hear it. And so what happens is we have this sort of re-engineering process that happens by way of us learning where our own boundaries are. And I would argue, certainly by way of children of addicts, is learning that you are worthy of having those boundaries.
Dude, that's so powerful. You are worthy of having those boundaries. And finally, Max, what message do you have? I mean, that was a great one right there. But anyone who's listening who's currently stuck in a cycle of family addiction, and maybe they're feeling alone or hopeless right now because they've gone through this over and over and over again, what would you tell them?
That cycle or that chain will be broken. It's just a matter of whether it's going to be you who breaks it or not. Like I have spoken with many people, and this doesn't just happen by way of addiction, right? But just by way of example, I was currently working with somebody who was wanting to quit their job in corporate and go into business for themselves. They're a high level executive, and they said, like I'm really afraid of what this would mean for my family, for me to really take a step out on my own. And I said, okay, well, let's play out two scenarios here, right? And I said, scenario A is you step out and things go wrong, and you and your family get into some financial trouble while you're building your business. But then you build it and you get through it, right? So that could happen, right? That's not an unreasonable presupposition. Scenario B is that your kids grow up, and then they turn to you when they're at a certain age and they say, Dad, I've got a chance here to do this or do my own thing. And of course, every parent would encourage their kid to back themselves and say, like, go and do your thing, go and shoot for your potential. And your son or daughter turns back to you and says, well, how come you didn't?
Mhm.
And so which of those scares you more? Because like if you don't take this leap, like the next generation or the generation after will. Like evil can't last forever. If we think of it in sort of poetic terms, evil can't last forever. Like it will end. And so why is that story important? Well, let's bring it back to the context of addiction. Like this cycle will get broken. Like it will get broken. It will get broken. It's like baked into our evolutionary biology that we often parent in reaction to our own childhoods. So we
Yes, yes.
try and keep the stuff that worked, and we try and fill in the blanks by way of things that didn't work for us, right? So for anyone who's listening, if you're stuck, if you are that person where you are stuck in that cycle, is just understand that it will get broken. It's just a question of whether you're going to be the one who continues that cycle or whether you break it. And to break it requires a lot of emotional labor, self-reflection, heavy lifting, re-engineering of boundaries. It could cost you certain relationships, etc. But it's either going to be you or your kids, or their kids. So I think if you bite the bullet and you accept that that's your role. That's something my therapist has talked with me a lot about. Is like if you think about your evolutionary line and your evolutionary tree, at some stage, someone has to do the heavy lifting.
Mhm.
And if you look back at your evolutionary tree, your family tree, you'll see that there's a clear delineation after you by way of what changed. And
Mm.
so someone needs to be that person, whether that person is going to be you or the next person, because that person hasn't shown up. Because if they had shown up, you wouldn't be in the situation that you are. You need to be that person. That's what I would say to them.
Yeah, and that and that they're worthy enough and have the potential to break it.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot more to you than you could possibly imagine. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Max, I wanna, one, thank you for your openness and for your, ability to be able to, I know this is, like, perfect timing because not only can you tell your story, but then there's this other side of you that can explain it, and then you have this ability where you're helping others. And we do on our addiction podcast, we just had a guy that was super successful, ran, a large, business and was an alcoholic. you
Right.
know, at the same time. And I know you've seen that and experienced that before. If there is, you know, leaders that are out there that are facing addiction, you know, are having situations or whatever, what's the website? What's your website? I know you do all types of coaching. What's your coaching website, and how could somebody like you got a book coming out? How can somebody get a hold of you or follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to maxstevenscoaching.com. So Stevens is spelled with a PH. Go to maxstevenscoaching.com and just book in a call with me. Like won't cost you anything, and I'm happy to listen to you.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I know there are a lot of leaders that are out there that are that. I see it all the time, you know, when we go places, and I know you do, you know, when you're out there at conferences and stuff like that, you know, and that's a weakness that is there, you know, and there's a lot of unfortunately, addiction creates this superpower also on the other side. If you can manage it, a lot of people can't, but I see a lot of people that are high level people have addiction
Oh
problems.
yeah, certainly. Certainly. The high performers journey is, you know, birthed in pain often.
Yeah, and I know you had shared that earlier. Well, thanks, Max, for sharing your story. I really appreciate it, and thank you for being so open today.
My
And
absolute
you're going to help a lot of people.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.